Hi, I'm Kieren.
And I'm Riku.
And welcome to Artificially Ever After
Short Stuff. Cool. So what are we going to talk about today, Kieren?
Yeah, so we're going to be answering the question, or trying to answer the question, of which chatbot is best for you. But as we'll come to see, it's quite a subjective and personal question. But yeah, this is being motivated by the fact that there are now millions of AI models, chatbots, LLMs that are out there, which kind of baffled me when I found that out. As of this year, there are over 2 million AI models just on this one website called Hugging Face, which is a website that hosts a lot of the open source models that you can go and try out for free and download. So, it's probably well over that number in the entirety of the AI landscape. But even if we just look at the big brands, so we've got, ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, Google's one, Llama, Grok, DeepSeek. So these kind of maybe somewhat household names now in the AI chatbot space. Most people don't have any idea what to pick, or you have to go and get a subscription to each of these to try them out and find the one that's best for you. It gets pricey real quick. But everyone's still asking this question, which is the smartest, most capable model out of them all that I can just go to every time? Is there another one that I should be using when I'm doing a slightly different task maybe? And I think we have this thought a lot when we do coding, don't we, that we'll go to a slightly different model maybe. But there is a twist to this question about which model is best, in that it is very context dependent, and also different models are strong at different things. And like we just hinted at there are some that are maybe better at coding. There are some that are better at writing or math or creativity. Some which may be a bit more kind of secure with your data and have better privacy restrictions, or some that are much more polite to you, some which I think you've been testing out recently don't really care how they respond to you and are just very casual and informal. I think Grok maybe, I've not tried it myself, but it seems like a super chillaxed chatbot. So given this very complex landscape now, where we have lots of different things we might want to ask a chatbot in different contexts, different problems, and we have this huge landscape of different models that can answer those problems, each with their own strengths, how on earth do we go and figure out which chatbot is best for us?
So traditionally, people use these things called benchmark tests. And you can think of these a bit like school exams that test for different things. So you can have your maths test. So actually for language models, we use the GSM-8 benchmark test. So this is grade school maths. So then that they have like little, those kind of questions. It's like Alfie has 58 watermelons and sells half of them. And a whole
and then
string
he has
of
3 fish as well. Or something.
Yeah. But the idea there is that you do need a good understanding of reasoning and maths to actually answer that question.
Right.
You have other benchmark tests like humanities last exam, which sounds kind of crazy. That's basically trivia on steroids. It's meant to be this benchmark test that tests for all kinds of PhD level questions.
Right.
But when we think about how to measure intelligence, I think it's easy if we just think about our own lives and our experience at school. Just because you do well on an exam at school doesn't mean you're super smart. And intelligence is so much more nuanced than that.
Yeah, and the opposite's true as well, isn't it? Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. And on top of that, I mean, the way these questions are framed in these benchmark tests, they don't even reflect how we actually use these language models. So no one really asks how they're 58 watermelons, right? Really, we use these things to write emails. Some of us code, ask for recipes, explanations, life advice.
Yeah.
And there's just not really a benchmark test that captures all of that. So we're seeing a big shift from these static benchmark tests towards more dynamic ones. So that's actually where people look into this thing called LM Arena, which we'll talk much more about later in this episode. But we also see that even these more dynamic methods have their flaws.
So today we're going to be discussing all of these points, hopefully quite quickly in a short stuff episode. But we're going to be doing this with the help of Anthony Duncalf, who is the CEO of Switchboard AI, which is a startup looking to solve some of these challenges with picking the best chatbots for your prompt and for your problem, and how he envisions the future of how we'll navigate this now enormous landscape of different AI chatbots that you can go to. So yeah, here's the conversation with Anthony.
Yeah, I just want to kick it off by asking, how do you describe the problem Switchboard is trying to solve, and why is it an important problem?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I think to start, what I would say is that Switchboard is seeking to solve this problem of distributed intelligence. So there are hundreds of capable chatbots out there, all excelling at slightly different things. And some are better than others at different tasks. So some write better, some reason better, Some are cheaper or faster, but for most users, it's practically impossible to know which one is the best for the given task. And so this problem, it's not a case of, which models are good enough. It's more about, there are too many of them to choose from. So having the right tools or being able to tap into the right system that's going to be able to make those decisions for you, that's fundamentally the issue around routing and what we're trying to solve. So, routing is functionally about directing your prompt to the model that's most likely to produce the result that the user is actually looking for. And so what this means is that the best possible outcome for your needs is the desired outcome, and you're looking for that whilst trying to benefit from the diversity of the AI ecosystem. So in other words, you don't need to pick for the best model, you're simply routed to that, just interfacing with one UI, for example.
Right. So I guess it's like there's so many complex tasks that people are trying to use language models for. We're embracing that many language models have different skill sets, and like routing's almost like an agency, like it kind of finds the right person for you depending on your problem. Is that how it works?
You can kind of think of it as like an automatic comparison site. You know how you go for insurance. You want to be able to go to a one-stop shop and be able to find the best deal that's out there, or in a sense, in less of it being about monetary value, but more about being the actual value of the potential for the best outcomes. And that's kind of what routing is aspiring to be.
I mean, it's funny, isn't it? Because like the whole AI industry currently is giving us this narrative that they're trying to build the most capable, the smartest, getting towards kind of AGI, super intelligent model that can do it all. So it kind of seems that what we're being told is we need to go to that company because they have the most capable, the smartest model. But obviously you highlighted there that there is a landscape of kind of nuances and capabilities to those models. Could you just touch on, though, because we've obviously seen these benchmarks and rankings that these companies often kind of highlight when they're kind of ranking at the top of them, and why you should therefore use their model. Why is it so tricky to actually just kind of rank the best or the smartest chatbot, and we always go to that one? And what are the main flaws in those benchmarking approaches that we've seen so far?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. I think a great analogy is how we think about kind of how we value human intelligence generally. It's a pretty flawed metric, IQ, that we use. There's a lot of problems and people take a lot of gripe with it anyway. So if you can imagine that it's difficult to do it for humans, for something that's equally as complex, if not more complex, like a system that has an underlying architecture completely different to anything that we know and is effectively a black box, trying to assess that is a very, very challenging task. And so I mean, the way I used to think about this is that I used to consider the challenge to be, what is the smartest chatbot, right? We always kind of innately value intelligence. But I guess what I soon realized is that whilst kind of these benchmarks that exist, I call them trust me bro benchmarks, whilst these benchmarks are out there and they perform some function where, they're able to pit competitors against each other, or they're able to be indicative of being performant in particular domains, what they aren't optimizing for is for utility. And the way in which humans interact with these services is less so how we might interface with a brand, right? A brand is more personal. We care more so about the functional output. And so if we're dealing with outcomes, we're working towards what is the model that's going to provide the best outcome for me within the context for which I'm seeking an answer, or I'm asking for a kind of a service to be performed. And so being universal computers, our brains are able to comprise a lot of different metrics into a single kind of value proposition. So things like clarity or consistency, style of writing, these are very, very difficult things to actually numerically put into a metric. But our brains are able to kind of evaluate these. And so having these static benchmarks which exist out there, they're all great, really well and good, but they are subjective, they are static, they don't change, and often they can have all sorts of problems like data leakage, and main labs now, they scrape a lot of this data, unknowingly may bias their models. And so it creates like a flawed ecosystem. Whereas there have been pioneers out there. I mean, one that we're going to talk about later, which is LM Arena. They've done a lot of work to kind of pioneer this live leaderboard, which is primarily focused on user feedback. And this is where we're then being able to leverage the ability for humans to comprise a vast amount of information into a single kind of value, as to pit two models against one another in pairwise comparisons. And so, yeah, it's less about smartness, it's less about intelligence, it's more about what is the outcome value of this model and what can it actually provide me. And so that's where I think the framing needs to be less about kind of smartness and more focused towards what is the performance outcomes of this model.
Wow, that was an amazing summary of the evolution of how language models benchmarked, and one of my next questions was whether you could kind of elaborate on what LM Arena is, but I think you did that really well. So I guess just to follow up on that, in terms of this problem, so there's so many different language models available. Has LM Arena kind of solved that problem? Now that the LM Arena's kind of shift is leveraging exactly what you said about how humans have this innate ability to kind of measure which chatbot is doing better on these very nuanced tasks. So we've got loads of LM Arena data. Can people just pick the best one at top of LM Arena? Is that enough to solve this problem of choice paralysis?
So that's again another great question. What I would say is I'm actually a huge fan of LM Arena, so take everything I'm about to say with a pinch of salt, and don't see it as kind of slanderous. But there was a great paper that came out by Cohere Labs, and they kind of went in with the intention of, it's borderline defamation. It was quite an aggressive paper, let's put it that way. And it effectively set out a bunch of problems with the way in which LM Arena was approaching their benchmarking, and the way that they were actually implementing things. And so I guess whilst the kind of the thought process was there, provide two outputs from two different models, allow users to compare them and take that information and propagate it through the system such that we can move towards this live leaderboard that was based around human-centric judgment. And whilst that was a great vision, the implementation has fallen quite short. And so I'll just go through a few of the issues, but for one of the underlying assumptions is uniform sampling. Unfortunately, the big labs are massively overrepresented. That has a huge bias on the leaderboard standings. And some of that was cleared up in the retort that came from LM Arena. But actually, it was, in my opinion, quite unconvincing. It's very clear that you can see, I think it was 25% was OpenAI. That is a huge amount in an ecosystem that is as broad as this. And so that has a huge effect on how we can actually rank things. And it kind of, what it does is it casts a bit of doubt over to the rankings and whether you're actually seeing the objective ranking of which model is best. And so the second one is actually just pure implementation. If you give a human two side-by-side comparisons for mostly mundane tasks with no incentive to actually provide truthful comparisons, you open yourself up to people taking shortcuts, maybe reading only one of the two comparisons and then just picking it, or maybe just selecting the other one because they think that the first one's not good. That adds some noise to the system. And secondly, if you provide no incentive, why would anyone turn to a platform to actually provide these kind of comparisons? Well, there have been many cases of goodwill, like Wikipedia and stuff like that, but actually what you find is this opens it up to trolls. It opens it up to people who want to gamify the leaderboards because there is incentives to actually becoming first in the leaderboard. And something I can kind of hint at a little bit is that there have been big names in the ecosystem, like Mark Zuckerberg, who was on Dwarkesh's podcast back in May, I think, and he openly admitted to gamifying LM Arena, which was quite interesting, the candidness. And so, yeah, I think in terms of the kind of aspirations of what LM Arena was to be, it was great. How it's turned out to be, I think it's been subpar. Where it can be, it definitely can be up there as if they were to change the way in which they're operating and actually promote a lot of these fundamental principles which would go back towards the original vision, I'm sure that this company would be able to succeed and gain the trust of many of the ecosystem back.
So I saw on your white paper and what Switchboard does, there's a kind of no public leaderboards rule. So the information that you're gathering from ranking on your site for these prompts doesn't get shown anywhere. So can you just kind of elaborate on what you were saying then as to why you think that will kind of address some of these problems?
Yeah. So again, this we were massively inspired by Ella Marina when I actually began the company and when we were beginning with the initial vision of what Switchboard could become. But one of the things that we quickly saw was a big issue was the prominence of public leaderboards and also the weight that was attributed to them. So you've kind of got to see this in two sides. You have the kind of innocent ecosystem where you've got a lot of these developers and AI labs who are constantly trying to push the industry forward. And then you have the financial incentives, mostly from larger labs like OpenAI, Meta, Google, and the like. And so what that does is it creates a competition landscape, which is influenced by forces that are a much more we won't call them malicious, but they're not benign. Let's put it that way. They're basically focused around pitting each other in a competitive way to try and be the best for the longest. So who can be on top stock, who can be on the top perch for as long as possible? Because when it comes around to our earning call, if we're on top, our stock price is going up. And so what that does is it creates a misalignment of incentives. So you've probably heard of Goodhart's law. It's, to paraphrase, it's when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. This is effectively what Ella Marina's public leaderboards and what many other public leaderboards have fallen foul of, which is once you publicize these things and it becomes a kind of de facto leaderboard, you end up becoming a target for gamification. And that is fundamentally the problem with public leaderboards. And so in an attempt to combat this, we've kind of said, okay, we don't care so much about the clout to be saying we're providing you with the best leaderboard rankings. We're more about focusing on the routing and the possibility of providing the best outcomes. And so we hide our leaderboard internally in order to fend off gamification. And so whilst that's much less marketable, for us, we're focused on providing the best product. So that's our thesis behind why we do that.
Nice. And then just to kind of drill in a tiny bit more on that without getting you to give away too much of your USP. So given that these rankings that the kind of users are seeing and what they're voting for isn't just going to kind of up or down vote a model on this sort of public leaderboard, can you give us some intuition as to what kind of the Switchboard routing algorithm is doing behind the scenes? When someone gives a prompt, is it kind of looking at certain clues in the prompt or what's it kind of actually optimizing for and what's it learning to predict or kind of provide you?
Yeah, I mean, so again, without giving too much away, I mean, I can go into a little bit of detail, but I guess the way I would explain it is that we were massively inspired by Ella Marina and many others in the ecosystem who have been trying to do routing effectively. And so what we tried to set out and do, and I think that we've done pretty well, is build a system that tries to minimize the risk that comes from all of these pain points that I've mentioned earlier with regards to routing and how you can take information from users and use it effectively with minimal systemic bias to propagate through user feedback in a way that is meaningful. And so one way that you can do that is through Bayesian machine learning. And so we have a proprietary model which has an underlying custom sampling algorithm. And so what we do is we take in a prompt, you send a query, our transformer analyzes it, and then it relates it through a number of different things that we have to effectively other similar prompts that have come in and user feedback. And so what that does is there's two layers to it. So you have this kind of globally crowd sourced preference system, which is able to effectively provide a more or less objective ranking. And then what we do is we kind of layer that with the individual's personal preferences. So as one uses the router, it actually learns your preferences. It becomes more attuned to you and what you like and what you dislike. And so when we layer that with this global preference, we're not only getting the benefits of global crowd predictions, which provides some level of objectivity, you're also getting these kind of personalized features for you. And so every single person's router is slightly different. And that's the kind of secret sauce. That is about being more functional, about kind of focusing on outcomes for the individual, for their specific task in context, rather than saying, there's a general ranking, this guy's found this product super helpful, and therefore you will too. It's more so, here's what we think is generally best, and here is what you think, and putting the two together.
Wow, that was a really, really insightful answer there. So that's really clear. Yeah.
Because we were talking about that earlier, weren't we? That both of us, and I'm sure a lot of other people, do have a slight preference with how they like responses from certain chatbots. But at the same time, I do go and use different ones for different tasks that I know are better at coding. Like, for example, I use Claude for coding quite frequently. So, it does seem like a great idea, basically.
Yeah, well, I think what you've pointed to there is that people don't care so much. Well, they do care, but they don't care as much as we think about the intelligence of it. And they're actually more attached to the personality. Is that you may find that you are, you really like the style of Claude and how, it just interfaces with you, the UI, the UX, the way it writes. All of these things are intangible. They're very hard to quantify, but when you see it, right? You can see that this is valuable to you. And so that's the kind of things that are subtle and very difficult to feed back into the system. And so that's why, we provide this service where you can access any of the models on the market whilst also having the smart routing feature. So you don't just have to have routing. You can select, oh, hey, I actually really, really want to use Gemini right now, or I could use Claude. I can overwrite that if I want to. And so having that optionality is a really, really fundamental feature for the product.
Nice. Yeah, I think with the sheer number of models that are out there now, there's very little replacement going on, because I don't think anyone probably has tried every single model and is able to go off and shoot their prompt to the one in every single context. And yeah, I guess just on a practical note, it was very reassuring when you said you can ultimately go and switch the model that you want if you're not going for the routing algorithm. Nice. Last one then, just to sort of wrap up. Where is Switchboard at its development? When can we go and try this thing out? Are you still building it? Is the algorithm still training? How much can you tell us? And yeah, what's next?
Yeah, I mean, I'm an open book, so I'll lay it all out. But I guess I started the business in February. This was around the DeepSeek moment. I saw a friend of mine, and he was, this was in the lab at Imperial, and he had 5 different screens open, and he was passing the same prompt between all of these different services. And he was kind of comparing the outputs anecdotally, spending a lot of money, need I add, on many subscriptions. And what I instantly thought was, this is ridiculous. How inefficient. What basis are you kind of judging any of these things on? And also the fact that you are trying 5 models when, as you mentioned rightly earlier, there are so many models out there, you are never going to be able to sample every one of them. It's just impossible. So on an individual basis, there is so much redundancy where so many people are trying to do this same task of testing and trying to evaluate all of these different models across the market. Wouldn't it be much better if there was a single place that could provide you the information necessary to determine which models are best for your task? And so that's what set me on the journey. And, a few months passed, I was doing a lot of research alongside my studies. And ultimately, we've launched a product 3 months ago. So it's on the market. People have been using it. We've been trialing it out with the first 2 businesses so far. We've been iterating really fast, trying to find product market fit. And so, we're still in that process. We're still doing our best. We've got our first bits of revenue coming in, but fundamentally, the routing engine is working extremely well. People are very satisfied with how it's performing. It's trained on, at this point, tens of thousands of prompt examples. We've had over 20,000 people visit the site and use it. So it's been going very, very well. But we are still ambling towards our target of becoming the natural chatbot choice for businesses. And so, as that happens, we're kind of also considering where the future might be. And so looking ahead, I guess what I would say is that routing could be the foundation for something much bigger. I hinted at ASI earlier, and I don't necessarily think there'll be one chatbot to rule them all at this stage. I do flicker between that opinion. But what I would say is you could get closer to what I would call effective ASI. In the same way that you get concurrency in a CPU, where you have multiple different programs being able to operate at once, you could have the same kind of idea in a system whereby you're kind of interfacing with multiple different chatbots in order to provide that seeming powerful service, whilst actually utilizing different things. So the way I kind of see it is a single system that decides which model to call for particular subtasks, recombining the results at the end, and essentially giving you a recursive agent that can traverse multiple intelligences dynamically. And so, as I mentioned, I don't think that the best system will be one where there's a single model that's going to top some leaderboard somewhere, but I do think that it's going to be one that's going to be able to orchestrate many different tools in many different contexts. And that's one of the long-term goals for Switchboard. So we'll see how we go.
Cool. Nice. Well, thank you so much. That was really cool to speak to you. So where do listeners go to try that out then? I'm guessing it's closely related to the business name, Switchboard AI.
Yeah, switchboard-ai.com. Unfortunately, we don't have the VC funding to buy the domain switchboard.com yet, but we'll get there. So
One day.
one day, we'll be there soon.
Awesome. Thanks again. Good to speak to you.
Nice
Good
one,
luck.
guys.
See you.
Best of luck.
Wow, that was such an interesting chat. And I think we've touched on previous episodes the limitations of these ways we evaluate language models. So it's really interesting to hear from Anthony, someone who's directly trying to address this problem.
Yeah, and I definitely feel that kind of decision paralysis as well with just the sheer number of models that are out there now and the limitations on my bank account with having subscriptions to all of them. So yeah, super excited to see what Switchboard goes on to do. And like Anthony said, you can try it out now if you'd like on switchboard-ai.com. And yeah, keep track on where things go in the future. But yeah, thank you so much for listening, and we'll catch you next time.